Her father sold her to the rival pack, unaware the Alpha King had dreamed of her his entire life. The moon hung low over the forest, casting silver shadows across the jagged cliffs that bordered the valley. The wind carried whispers, as if the night itself were speaking secrets too dangerous for daylight. In the heart of the valley, the trees grew thick and wild, their branches twisting like gnarled hands reaching toward the sky. This was the land of packs, of wolves that were not just animals, but beings of strength, pride, and blood-bound honor. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, her small hands clenched tightly around the hem of her simple cloak. Her father had told her she was strong, that she was special, but tonight those words felt hollow. Tonight he had sold her. Her father's figure was a shadow against the torchlight, his face a mask of false calm. "This is the only way," he said, his voice trembling just enough to betray the lie he told himself. "The rival pack will treat you well. Lyra didn't let him finish. She had heard enough. Fear and anger churned inside her like a storm, but there was also a strange, quiet resignation. She had lived with this family, in a home that felt more like a cage than a haven, and perhaps this unknown, dangerous future, was her first real chance at freedom. A horse whinnied, breaking the tense silence. Two men in the rival pack's colors stepped from the shadows, their eyes cold and assessing. Lyra's stomach turned, but she did not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. Her father handed her over with a mechanical nod. "May the spirits watch over you," he whispered. Lyra's eyes, dark and sharp, met his for a long moment. There was no forgiveness there, only a quiet, simmering defiance. She turned toward the men who would take her, and the forest swallowed her small figure as she walked away from everything she had known. The journey was long and silent. The men said little, but their eyes never left her. Every shadow in the night felt alive to Lyra, every rustle in the trees a potential threat. She had grown up listening to stories of the Alpha King, the ruler of the pack that dominated the valley, a wolf whose power was said to rival the very mountains. They said he was cold, merciless, and untouchable, a creature of legend. Lyra did not know that he had dreamed of her long before she had even opened her eyes to the world. In his visions, she was always there, her laughter like the wind over the cliffs, her eyes like twin moons that pierced the darkness of his nights. He had waited, unknowingly, for the moment fate would bring her to him. By the time they reached the rival pack's stronghold, the sky was tinged with the faint glow of dawn. The castle was built into the cliffs, its towers rising like jagged teeth, its walls ancient and scarred by countless battles. Lyra felt her heart thundering, not just from fear, but from the weight of destiny pressing down on her small shoulders. The gates opened, and the men handed her over to a guard whose presence alone demanded respect. His hair was silver in the morning light, his eyes sharp and calculating. "She is yours," the first man said, stepping back. Lyra straightened. She would not bow, would not cower. She had been taught to survive, and survival was her only weapon. Inside the hall, she was met with the cold grandeur of the rival pack's leaders. They were nothing like the men she had seen on the road. These were predators in every sense, proud, controlled, and dangerous. One of them, the matriarch of the pack, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "She is young," the matriarch said softly, "but there is fire in her. You can feel it even from a distance." Lyra held her ground. "I am not afraid of you," she said quietly, though her voice trembled just enough to betray the truth. The matriarch smiled faintly. "Good. You will need that courage." Night fell again, and Lyra was shown to a small chamber in the high tower. The room was simple, yet elegant, with tapestries depicting battles, hunts, and ceremonies of old. She looked out the window at the dark forest below and felt a strange pull in her chest, a mixture of dread and fascination. She did not know it, but far across the valley, the Alpha King had sensed her arrival. In the quiet of his private chamber, he had visions of a girl with dark eyes, standing tall even when fear tried to bend her. He had dreamed of her for years, unknowingly waiting for this very night when the world would finally bring them together. The first days were the hardest. Lyra learned the rules of the rival pack quickly. There was no mercy for weakness, no time for hesitation. She trained with others, her small frame pushed to its limits. Yet with every challenge, every struggle, she grew stronger. She was not just surviving, she was learning, adapting, becoming more than what her father had imagined. One evening, during a practice in the courtyard, she caught the eye of a young warrior from the rival pack. His hair was dark as the night, his eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon. He watched her with an intensity that made her uneasy, but also intrigued. "You fight like someone with something to prove," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself rather than her. Lyra frowned. "I do not need anyone's approval." He smiled faintly, a shadow of respect and challenge mixed in the curve of his lips. "Perhaps not. But strength alone is not enough. You will learn that soon." Even as he spoke, Lyra sensed something different in the air. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for a story to unfold, a story older than the mountains, deeper than the rivers, and far more dangerous than anything she had ever known. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra began to hear whispers among the pack members. Stories of the Alpha King, the one who ruled the valley with unmatched power. They said he had never taken an interest in any girl, that he was untouchable, his desires bound only to duty and the legacy of his bloodline. Yet some spoke of dreams, of visions, of a prophecy that one day a girl would come who would change everything. Lyra felt an unexplainable pull in her heart. Though she had never met him, she knew that the Alpha King was more than just a tale. He was real, and somehow he was already connected to her. One night she could not sleep. The moonlight spilled across her chamber, silver and cold. She moved to the window, gazing out at the forest below. Her thoughts were a tangled web of fear, anger, and an unfamiliar longing. Then in the distance she saw him, the Alpha King. His figure stood atop a cliff, silent and imposing. His eyes were closed, as if listening to something beyond the world. For a moment, Lyra felt as if he could see her, not as a stranger, but as someone he had been waiting for his entire life. A shiver ran down her spine. She did not know why, but she felt both terrified and drawn to him. The connection was invisible, intangible, yet undeniable. It was as if fate itself had reached out and tangled their destinies together. The next morning brought a challenge she had not anticipated. The matriarch approached her with a serious expression. "The Alpha King will be visiting," she said. Lyra's heart caught in her chest. She had heard the stories, but now the reality was before her. "He wishes to see all newcomers himself. You must present yourself." Lyra nodded, trying to hide her nerves. She trained, practiced, and prepared herself as best she could. Yet nothing could have readied her for the first moment she saw him face to face. When the Alpha King entered the hall, the air seemed to change. His presence was like gravity, pulling everything toward him. He was taller than any man she had seen, his eyes sharp and intense, his dark hair flowing like shadows in the torchlight. Yet there was something in his gaze that stopped her, not fear, but recognition, as if he had been waiting for her in dreams she could not remember. Their eyes met, and the hall seemed to fall silent. Lyra felt a strange warmth in her chest, a feeling that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She realized in that instant that her life was no longer her own. It belonged to destiny, to the forest, and to the man whose dreams had long preceded her existence. The Alpha King took a single step toward her, and the silence deepened. "I have been waiting," he said, his voice low and commanding, yet carrying an almost tender weight. Lyra's lips parted, but no words came. All she could do was meet his gaze, understanding that her journey had only just begun, and that the path ahead would test her strength, her heart, and her very soul. The matriarch's eyes flicked between them, knowing more than she said. The air was thick with unspoken truths. and Lyra realized that nothing in her life would ever be the same. And then, as if the forest itself were conspiring to seal their fates, a distant howl shattered the morning calm, a howl that belonged to a wolf pack unlike any she had encountered. A rival threat was approaching, and the first test of courage and loyalty had already begun. Lyra swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She had survived her father's betrayal, she had faced the unknown, but now the world demanded more. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the Alpha King, her destiny, would be at her side for better or worse. The story of fire, shadows, and forbidden longing was only beginning, and the first step had been taken. The morning air was sharp with the scent of pine and distant smoke. Lyra's chest heaved as she stood beside the Alpha King, the castle walls towering behind them like ancient guardians. The distant howl she had heard the night before had grown louder, multiplied, until it became a chorus that set her nerves on edge. The rival pack was near, and it was no ordinary challenge. They came with purpose, and the forest seemed to whisper their intent. The Alpha King's presence was a constant shadow beside her, silent yet commanding. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, catching every movement, every flicker of motion among the trees. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but firm. "Do not underestimate them. They do not fight fairly." Lyra nodded, her hands clenched into fists. She had survived her father's betrayal, the harsh road to this pack, and the uncertainty of a new life. Yet this was a different test. This was a moment where courage alone might not be enough. The rival pack scouts appeared first, figures slipping through the shadows with predatory precision. Lyra could feel the tension in the air, sharp as the edge of a knife. She had trained for combat, but nothing could have prepared her for the Alpha King's methodical, commanding presence. He moved with a quiet strength, a predator aware of every heartbeat in the forest, and she realized that her own fear was a small thing compared to the magnitude of his power. Then the main force appeared. Wolves of all sizes, sleek and muscular, their eyes gleaming with hunger and aggression. The ground trembled under their paws, and even the trees seemed to bend toward them, as if nature itself feared the violence that was about to unfold. Lyra's heart raced. She wanted to flee, to hide, yet a strange resolve anchored her in place. She would not run, not now, not ever. The battle began with a howl that shook the valley. The Alpha King moved like a shadow, striking with precision, protecting his pack while never revealing all his strength. Lyra watched him, awe and fear intertwining, as he seemed to anticipate every movement of the rival wolves. She could feel the rhythm of his power, like a song that only she could hear, and her pulse quickened, not just with fear, but with an unspoken connection she could not name. A wolf lunged toward her, teeth bared, and instinct took over. Lyra sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the attack, and drew a training blade she had carried in her cloak. It was light, but it was enough. She swung with a courage she did not know she possessed, and the wolf fell back, stunned. The Alpha King's eyes flicked to her, sharp and unreadable. There was a moment, a heartbeat, where their gazes met and something unspoken passed between them. He did not smile, nor did he speak. But Lyra felt it, a recognition, a bond that existed beyond words, beyond fear, beyond the limits of mortal understanding. The battle raged until the sun was high in the sky. The rival pack, realizing they were facing not just warriors but a force beyond comprehension, began to retreat. Lyra's muscles ached, her cloak was torn, and her hands bore scratches and bruises, but she stood upright, proud and unbroken. The Alpha King approached her slowly, his dark hair falling over his shoulders, eyes still sharp with intensity. "You have spirit," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Many would have fled, many would have broken, but you endured." Lyra met his gaze, unsure whether to feel fear or pride. "I did what I had to," she replied softly. He nodded as though her words confirmed something he had always known. "And yet," he said quietly, almost to himself, There is more in you than survival. There is fire. And that fire will shape what is to come. After the battle, the castle returned to its usual rhythm, but Lyra could not return to her old sense of normalcy. She wandered the halls and courtyards, her thoughts a tangle of fear, awe, and something deeper, something that made her pulse race whenever the Alpha King was near. She had seen him in battle, commanding and untouchable, yet in the quiet moments he was a different being, almost human, almost fragile in the way he carried the weight of leadership alone. That evening, the matriarch approached her again. "You have survived your first test," she said. Her eyes were sharp, measuring, yet there was a hint of pride. "But you must learn more than combat. You must learn strategy, patience, and the subtle ways of power. The Alpha King, he does not simply command with strength. He commands with understanding, with foresight. You must see beyond what is in front of you." Lyra listened carefully, understanding that this lesson was as much about survival as it was about destiny. She had been sold by her father, thrust into a world she did not choose. Yet here, among warriors, kings, and ancient rules, she began to feel a strange sense of belonging, a pull that went beyond fear. Days passed, and Lyra trained under the guidance of the rival pack's finest warriors. She learned the language of shadows, how to move unseen, how to read the intentions of others from the slightest shift of muscle or eye. She was not the strongest, nor the fastest, but she was clever, resilient, and fiercely determined. And always, somewhere in the back of her mind, was the memory of the Alpha King's gaze, the fire she had glimpsed in his eyes, a reflection of the destiny that was now entwined with her own. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting long, golden shadows across the courtyard, Lyra encountered him again. He had appeared silently, as if drawn by some invisible thread connecting their fates. "You train well," he said, his voice quiet yet commanding. "But you hold back," Lyra frowned. "I do not understand," she replied. He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "You fear what you can become," he said, "but strength is not something to fear, it is something to embrace. And there are things you will need to embrace, things that will test you beyond what you have ever known." She felt her breath catch. There was a strange magnetism in his words, a weight that went beyond mere instruction. She did not fully understand why, but she trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone. And yet, fear lingered at the edges of her heart. That night, the forest itself seemed alive with whispers. Lyra could not sleep. The memory of the rival pack's attack, the Alpha King's presence, and the strange pull she felt toward him consumed her thoughts. She walked to the highest tower, looking out over the valley. The moon reflected on the rivers and cliffs, silver and cold, and she thought she could see the outline of wolves moving far below, unseen yet present. And then she felt it, a presence, subtle but undeniable. The Alpha King stood behind her, silent as the shadows. "You think you understand danger," he said softly, "but there is a darkness coming that will test us both. Not just the rival pack, but forces older than this valley, older than any of us. And you will be at the heart of it." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes wide. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the horizon where the forest darkened unnaturally and a chill ran through the air. Finally, he said, "Because you are not ordinary. You have the fire, the courage, and the heart that can stand against what is coming. And because I have dreamed of you my entire life, even before I knew you existed, even before the world allowed our paths to cross." The words sent a shiver through Lyra, part disbelief, part awe, part something she could not name. Her life, sold by a father who did not understand her worth, had led her here, to this man, this king, this force of nature. The following days brought new challenges. Lyra trained alongside the Alpha King's elite warriors, learning strategies and techniques that tested both her mind and body. She began to understand the depth of his wisdom, the way he anticipated moves before they happened, and the way he saw people, not as pawns, but as extensions of the world he sought to protect. Yet even amidst the training, moments of tension, quiet understanding, and subtle longing grew between them. Small gestures, a hand brushing against hers, a shared glance during combat drills, a fleeting smile in the quiet of the hall, wove threads of connection that neither dared speak aloud. One evening, while walking through the moonlit forest, Lyra asked, "Do you dream of things that have not happened?" The Alpha King paused, looking at her with a softness that contrasted with his usual intensity. "Always," he replied. "Some dreams guide us, some warn us. But some are visions of what must be protected. And you are part of one of those dreams." Lyra felt a mixture of fear and wonder. The truth of her destiny pressed upon her like the weight of the cliffs above, and yet there was comfort in knowing that she was not alone. The Alpha King was there, not just as a protector, but as someone who understood her in a way no one else ever could. But the peace was fragile. Rumors began to spread, whispers of a shadow in the forest, a rival force gathering strength, and an ancient power awakening that threatened to engulf the valley. Lyra realized that the path ahead would be more treacherous than she had imagined. Her courage, her training, and her bond with the Alpha King would be tested in ways that were only beginning to reveal themselves. And in the quiet moments, as she lay awake in her chamber, she felt the pull of destiny tighten around her heart. The Alpha King had dreamed of her, yes, but dreams were fragile. Reality was harsher. And soon, reality would demand more than courage. It would demand everything. The valley was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds had vanished from the cliffs, and the wind carried a chill that pressed deep into the bones. Lyra stood at the edge of the forest, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, eyes scanning the shadows where the rival pack had once prowled. The Alpha King was beside her, silent as always, his dark gaze fixed on the horizon as if he could see the movements of fate itself. "The forest feels wrong," Lyra said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "It's heavy." He did not respond immediately. His hand brushed against hers, a fleeting contact, and yet the warmth it carried was unmistakable. "It is," he said finally. "There is a darkness stirring older than the rival packs, older than any of us. It moves with purpose and it knows we are here." Lyra swallowed hard. Her training, her courage, her growing bond with the Alpha King, it all felt fragile in the face of this unseen threat. Yet something inside her refused to bend. She had survived her father's betrayal, she had survived the rival pack, and she had faced the raw, untouchable power of the Alpha King himself. She would not falter now. The first signs came as whispers in the trees. Shadows moved where no creature should be, and the air grew thick with tension. Lyra's heart raced as she followed the Alpha King deeper into the forest. Every step felt like crossing a threshold, every sound a warning. She had never felt the forest so alive, so aware, so dangerous. "They are coming," the Alpha King said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "And not for simple conquest. They are hunting something or someone." Lyra glanced at him, feeling the weight of his words. "Do you mean me?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowed his pace, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You are part of what they seek," he said finally. "But not the only part. You are a key. And they know it, even if they do not understand why." The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had always known her life was unusual, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her destiny was entwined with forces she did not yet understand, and the Alpha King, her protector, her guide, the man who had dreamed of her, stood at her side, silent but resolute. Suddenly, the forest erupted into movement. Wolves, unlike any she had seen, emerged from the shadows. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their movements were unnervingly precise, almost as if they were controlled by a single, unseen will. Lyra felt her breath catch. These were not ordinary creatures. They were something older, something darker. The Alpha King stepped in front of her, his stance protective, commanding. "Stay close," he said. "Do not be afraid. Fear is what they want." Lyra's hands tightened around the training blade at her side. She had faced the rival pack and survived. She had faced the unknown and endured. She could face this. And yet, there was a part of her that trembled. Not for herself, but for the world she had only begun to understand, for the fragile bond forming between her and the Alpha King, for the destiny she could not yet grasp. The first wolf lunged. The Alpha King moved like lightning, intercepting it with a force that sent the creature crashing into the trees. Lyra followed his lead, striking with careful precision, her movements guided by instinct and training. Together they moved as one, a silent rhythm that spoke of trust, connection, and shared destiny. Hours seemed to pass in moments. The forest became a blur of motion, shadows, and glowing eyes. Lyra felt exhaustion creeping into her muscles, but she refused to falter. The Alpha King's presence was constant, a grounding force amidst chaos. He moved with purpose, protecting her, guiding her, and yet never stopping her from learning, from testing herself, from becoming what she was meant to be. And then, as if the forest itself had shifted, the wolves retreated. They vanished into the shadows, leaving only silence and the faint echo of their howls. Lyra sank to the ground, gasping for breath, her body trembling from fatigue and adrenaline. The Alpha King knelt beside her, his dark eyes scanning her face. "You fought well," he said softly, "stronger than I expected." Lyra met his gaze, feeling a strange mixture of pride and vulnerability. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. "No, you did it. You were the one who held your ground. Courage is not just about strength, it is about heart, and you have more heart than most I have known." The words settled over her like a warm cloak. For the first time, Lyra felt seen, not as a tool, not as a pawn, but as someone capable, worthy, and essential to the world she had stumbled into. The next days were filled with preparation. The Alpha King trained her in strategy, teaching her to see the battlefield as a living thing, to anticipate moves, to use the forest, the wind, and even the shadows to her advantage. Lyra learned quickly, her mind absorbing every lesson, her body adjusting to the demands of a world where survival depended on skill, courage, and awareness. Yet even amidst the training, the tension between them grew. Small moments, a hand brushing against hers, a shared look in the quiet of the hall, the Alpha King's protective presence always near, wove threads of connection that neither dared acknowledge fully. Lyra found herself drawn to him in ways she could not explain, her heart quickening whenever he was near, her thoughts lingering on him long after he had gone. One evening, as they practiced beneath the silver light of the moon, Lyra paused. "Do you ever feel lonely?" she asked, her voice tentative. He lowered his gaze, studying her in the quiet of the night. "Always," he said finally. "Leadership is a burden and it isolates. I have had warriors, advisors, even allies, but true understanding, true connection is rare. Until you came." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest. "I don't understand it all," she admitted, "but something about this place and you feels like home." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. "Home is not a place," he said softly. "Home is a presence. And you are becoming part of mine, whether you know it or not." Her breath caught. The weight of his words, the intensity of his gaze, and the undeniable pull between them left her trembling. She wanted to step forward, to close the distance, to speak the feelings that had been growing in her heart. But she hesitated, unsure, unready, yet unable to deny the connection that had taken root between them. But destiny, as always, was relentless. News came from the scouts. The dark force that had stirred in the forest was moving closer, its intent undeniable. Villages near the valley had been abandoned, signs of unnatural power everywhere. This was not a simple rival pack or a territorial dispute. This was something older, something far more dangerous, and it was heading straight for them. The Alpha King's expression darkened. "We must move quickly," he said. "They are testing us, probing for weakness. If we hesitate, we will lose everything." Lyra felt the weight of his words press against her chest. She had survived her father, she had survived the rival pack, and she had endured battles beyond imagining. But this felt larger, more immense, more dangerous than anything she had faced. And yet, even as fear pressed against her, she found strength in the Alpha King's presence. She was not alone. She would not face this alone. The night before the coming battle, Lyra stood in the tower, gazing at the moonlit forest. Her thoughts were tangled: fear, anticipation, longing, and the growing awareness of her connection to the Alpha King. The bond between them had deepened in ways that went beyond words or gestures, a silent understanding that neither could fully articulate. And then he appeared, stepping silently into the moonlight beside her. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. Lyra shook her head even as her heart raced. "I am ready," she said, though the words felt both true and incomplete. He looked at her, a shadow of a smile on his lips. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is the choice to face what is coming, even when every instinct tells you to run. And you have that choice in abundance." She met his gaze, feeling the full weight of their shared destiny, the fire of their connection, and the immensity of what lay ahead. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice steady. He nodded, his eyes dark and unreadable, yet filled with something unspoken, something older than the mountains, deeper than the rivers. "Together," he echoed. As dawn broke over the valley, the forest trembled. Shadows lengthened, winds whispered warnings, and the first tendrils of the dark force began to encroach upon the land. Lyra and the Alpha King stood side by side, ready for what was to come. The rival packs, the ancient threat, and the trials of destiny itself awaited them. And in that moment, Lyra realized that everything had led her here: her father's betrayal, her journey through the unknown, her training, and the bond she shared with the Alpha King. The battles to come would not just test her courage, but her heart, her understanding of power, and the connection that had silently grown between them. The story of fire, shadows, destiny, and forbidden longing was about to enter its most dangerous chapter. And Lyra, who had been sold by her father, would face the night that would decide not just her fate, but the fate of the entire valley. The valley was silent, save for the distant rustle of the trees and the soft whisper of the wind through the cliffs. Lyra stood beside the Alpha King on a jagged ridge, the morning sun casting long, gold and silver shadows across the forest below. The dark force that had haunted the valley for weeks was close now, its presence a heavy weight that pressed on the air itself. Lyra's heart pounded, a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had trained, fought, and grown stronger than she ever imagined. But even so, standing here, facing something that seemed older than the mountains themselves, she felt the trembling of mortal uncertainty. The Alpha King's gaze swept over the horizon, dark and unreadable, yet his hand brushed hers, steadying, grounding. "Stay close," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Lyra nodded. "Together," she echoed, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions inside her. The first signs appeared as a ripple across the forest. Shadows twisted unnaturally, moving against the wind, and the trees groaned as if awakening from a long slumber. Lyra could feel the cold brush against her skin, the eerie weight of something alive and ancient pressing in from all sides. "They are here," the Alpha King said, his tone low, almost a growl. "And they hunger for more than territory. They hunger for fear, for power, for control of this valley." Lyra gripped her blade tighter. The forest had been their training ground, their refuge, and their battlefield. She had learned its rhythms, its whispers, its hidden paths. Yet now it felt alien, hostile, alive with a force beyond anything she had encountered before. The dark force revealed itself in full. Wolves, but unlike any wolves she had seen, emerged from the shadows. Their eyes glowed with unnatural light, and their forms shimmered, almost as if they were made of smoke and shadow. Their movements were precise, deliberate, coordinated by a mind older than the mountains themselves. Lyra felt her breath catch. The rival packs had been dangerous, but this was something beyond mortal reckoning. The forest seemed to bend around them, shadows rising like waves, the wind carrying whispers of warning and malice. The Alpha King stepped forward, a pillar of unyielding strength. "Do not falter," he commanded. "We are the guardians of this valley. We will not yield." Lyra's chest rose and fell with the effort of controlled breathing. She met his gaze, seeing not just power, but understanding, strategy, and something unspoken that reached deep into her heart. There was no room for doubt now. Her destiny, her courage, and the bond she shared with him would determine the outcome of this battle. The first clash erupted with a howl that split the valley. Lyra moved with all the skill she had acquired, striking precisely, moving through the shadows as the Alpha King moved beside her like a dark, protective storm. Each movement was calculated, every strike measured, yet there was a rhythm between them, a silent understanding that made them more than partners. They were extensions of one another. Lyra realized in that moment that the bond she shared with him was not just emotional, but almost a force of nature itself. It guided her, strengthened her, and gave her the courage to face something that would have broken ordinary warriors. Yet the dark force was relentless. More wolves emerged, their glowing eyes fixed on them, their movements unnervingly precise, and the forest itself seemed to shift against them, the very earth rebelling. Lyra felt fear gnawing at her heart, but she did not let it control her. She had survived betrayal, rival packs, and the unknown. She would survive this. Hours passed in a blur of motion. The Alpha King fought with a precision and power that seemed impossible, yet he never left her side, never shielded her in a way that would deny her agency. She struck, defended, anticipated, and endured, the rhythm between them a silent promise of trust and understanding. At one point, a wolf lunged from the shadows, faster than she could react. But the Alpha King's hand shot out, pulling her back just in time, and in the same motion he struck the creature down with overwhelming force. Lyra's heart raced. "You could have," she began, but he shook his head. "Do not thank me," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "We do this together. Fear, courage, and bond, they are equal in battle. Remember that." She nodded, realizing the truth of his words. This was not just survival, it was connection, trust, and shared strength that went beyond any normal bond. The battle reached its peak in the heart of the forest. Shadows twisted violently, forming shapes she could not fully comprehend. Trees split and fell, the ground shook, and the wind carried a chill that burned like fire. Lyra fought with every ounce of strength and skill she had gained, moving beside the Alpha King as if they were one being. And then, a moment of stillness, a lull in the chaos. The Alpha King's eyes locked onto hers, and in that instant words were unnecessary. He reached for her, and she took his hand without hesitation. Their connection flared like a spark that ignited the shadows around them, a force neither fully understood but both felt. Together, they moved forward. The dark wolves hesitated, sensing the unity and power between the Alpha King and Lyra. And then, with a combination of strategy, strength, and the unspoken bond of destiny, they struck. The shadows recoiled as if burned by an invisible flame. The forest seemed to sigh, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. Lyra's legs trembled, exhaustion and relief washing over her, yet she remained upright. The Alpha King's hand tightened around hers, grounding her. "They will return," he said quietly, his voice heavy with awareness. "But today we have won this battle together." Lyra's chest rose and fell with effort. "Together," she echoed, her heart full of both exhaustion and a strange, overwhelming warmth. She had survived, she had fought, and she had realized the depth of her bond with the Alpha King, a connection that had been foretold in dreams and had now become reality. That evening, the valley was calm. The forest whispered, the moonlight silvered the trees, and the Alpha King led Lyra to the cliffs overlooking the river. Below, the water flowed quietly, reflecting the first stars of the night. "You were remarkable today," he said softly, his eyes reflecting pride, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart ache with longing. "You faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, and you did not falter." Lyra looked at him, a mixture of awe and affection in her gaze. "I could not have done it without you," she admitted. "You made me believe I could stand." He reached for her face, his touch gentle but commanding. "No," he said, his voice low. "You made yourself believe. I only showed you the way, and now we move forward together as equals. That is the only way we survive, not just the valley but the destiny that brought us here." Her chest tightened with emotion. She had been sold, betrayed, and thrust into a world she did not understand. Yet here, at the edge of the valley with the Alpha King beside her, she finally felt a sense of belonging, of purpose, and of love that was quiet but powerful, unstoppable yet gentle. The following days were spent rebuilding, preparing for the next challenge, and solidifying the bond that had grown between them. Lyra trained not just her body, but her mind, learning the deeper strategies of leadership, the subtleties of pack dynamics, and the ancient lore that shaped the valley itself. The Alpha King watched her, guiding her without imposing, teaching her without undermining, and slowly, imperceptibly, the unspoken bond between them deepened. She began to see him not just as a protector, but as someone whose heart and destiny were entwined with her own. One evening, under a sky full of stars, Lyra spoke quietly. "Do you think we can truly protect this valley?" He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight and something older than the mountains. "We will protect it," he said, "together. And when the darkness returns, as it always will, we will face it together, stronger than before. For strength is nothing without bond, and bond is what you and I share." Lyra's heart ached with understanding, gratitude, and longing. "I will not leave you," she whispered. He smiled, faint but full of meaning. "And I will not leave you, not now, not ever." The wind carried their words across the cliffs, and the valley seemed to answer in kind, the trees swaying, the rivers glimmering, and the stars above shining brighter, as if acknowledging the unity of two hearts that had been destined to find each other. The dark force had not been destroyed, only held at bay. Lyra knew that challenges would come again, that shadows would rise, and that destiny was an ongoing test. But she also knew that she was no longer alone. She had faced fear, betrayal, and darkness, and she had emerged stronger, more aware, and bound by a force deeper than fear, ambition, or even life itself, the bond with the Alpha King. And in that bond, in that connection, in that shared destiny, she finally found her true strength. Not as a pawn, not as a survivor, but as someone who had chosen courage, love, and unity over fear, separation, and doubt. The story that had begun with betrayal and uncertainty now ended with power, hope, and a bond that no darkness could break.